this time. So we have a lot of material to cover. So I'll go first. My name is April Dunham. I am one of the co-chairs on the Equity and Safety Task Force.
I'm Margaret Diamond.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. I'm Margaret Diamond. I'm the other co-chair of the committee.
Well, I'll go next. I'm Brian Core. I'm from NACOL. I'm not a member of the task force, but here to help. And well, maybe I can start a little tradition where I hand it off to the next person so we don't wonder who should go next. So I guess I'll hand it off to Gail because she's next to me on my screen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gail. I'm a member of the task force. I have a background in healthcare and in quality improvement. I'll hand it off to Marsh.
I'm Marsh Knapp. I'm here because I'm involved in the Interfaith Council and a bunch of other community organizations. And I'm a retired minister, and I'm going to report in a little later on our purpose subcommittee. And Sarah Beth.
Hi, I'm Sarah Beth Ward. I just moved to Bennington 2.5 years ago. Retired from healthcare, but got back into it a little bit since I've been up here. And glad to be on the committee. Did we do everybody?
I'll jump in real quick. My name is Cami McElhenney, and I'm with NACOL. I'm the Director of Training and Education, and I, along with Brian, will be here to help you through this process.
Thank you.
I don't think we heard from Ben or Lauren yet.
I'm Ben Kazawa, representing the Bennington Police Department on this board. Lauren?
Hi, I'm Lauren Wilcox. I'm a member of the task force, and my sort of specialty area is I'm a victims advocate for survivors of domestic violence. Lynn.
Hi, I'm Lynn Mazza. I'll turn my camera on as soon as I'm done eating dinner. I'm here representing the Vermont Center for Independent Living, which is a disability rights and advocacy organization. And I think we need to hear from Stu, right?
Yes, that's correct. I'm Stuart Hurd. I'm town manager, but I'm also your staff person for these events. And if I could, before we start the meeting, I need to read a bit for those people who want to watch or who are attending. And we have two attendees at the present time. Bruce Lee Clark and Jonas Spivak are our attendees at the present time. If you wish to join this meeting, the meeting notice can be found on our town website under the Select Board tab. If you are calling in, you dial 646-558-8656. Enter the webinar ID, which is 864-6641-5624, and follow the prompts. You can watch the Zoom meeting at the physical location, which is the Bennington Fire Facility, where our tech support are stationed. Attendees will be able to participate in the public comment by Zoom, phone, and at the firehouse location. Attendees can view the meeting, but must be recognized to speak. If you wish to speak, you have to be recognized by the chair, which would be *9 by your telephone. And when prompted, you will have to unmute yourself, which is *6 by telephone. And we ask that you please clearly state your full name and residence before speaking. Back to the chairs.
Thank you. So the first part of our agenda is going over minutes. Me and Margate did want to make a little bit of a change to the agenda, which I believe has to be voted on to make amendments.
That's correct.
Correct. Okay. So we make a motion to make a slight change to the agenda tonight. Any second?
What's
the change?
Yeah.
Oh, I apologize. That would be helpful. So we did want to, and Margay, I'm sorry, I'm going through my notes. If you have it on top of your head, can you go over the change a little bit?
Well, one change, I think it belongs as maybe a subtopic under purpose when we have Marsh and the rest of that subcommittee report out, was to spend a little bit of time talking about community outreach. So that surfaced as an important topic towards informing purpose and composition even. So we wanted to make sure that we added that as a item for discussion, if that's all right with everyone.
So I make a motion that we change the agenda to add a subtopic to the purpose discussion about community outreach.
Second.
Okay, so we'll make that, we're gonna add that to number 5
We
on
need to
the
vote.
agenda.
We need to vote.
Okay, do we have to do a roll call vote?
I don't think so. It's just a yes.
Okay. So all in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, so sorry, now we will make that change, and we're gonna add that under number 5 under composition.
Could I make a suggestion for this agenda? Or if not this one, at least the next one? I think we need to spend some time discussing the name of the committee. I think that's important. I just think after we discuss the purposes, that maybe we can throw out some names for us to think about, maybe not decide on today, but just put forth some ideas about naming the committee.
So we do have Brian, Core, and Cameron going over a little bit of oversight committees before and some developing recommendations. I think he may have some useful information. And I apologize, I'm echoing to myself. But if he, which we address it after, and then we can talk about a little bit more. But I think he may have some useful information for us at that point.
April, I wanted to make sure we also make an amendment to the notes of the last meeting. That was called in by Jeannie, and she wanted to make sure that members of the select board are not considered members of the task force, that they are there to assist, but they were listed incorrectly, I guess, in the minutes. It's just a note moving forward. So I guess we need to publicly, as a group, decide that it's okay to amend those minutes from the last time.
I'm sorry, and the ones that I'm looking at have in attendance and they list the non-task force members, and then under that it says task force. So unless we're looking at different copies of something, I'm not sure what I would change.
So I think Jeannie and Bruce and Deanne are all part of this tech support and just holding the room open. So they're not associated with the task force itself. They
Right.
only do the tech support and keeping the room open so that we have a physical location that people attend.
So they should not be listed as in attendance at all.
Stu, do you have guidance on that?
Well, they should be listed as in attendance, just not as task force members, if that's the question.
Okay.
Right.
And I think they just want us to
Although
clarify
that's
that
been
they
what-
are just tech support and having the room open for a physical location. So they just want to clarify that is the case and they're not part of the task force.
Okay, so I can do, right now I have task force and all the task force members' names, and then under that I can put tech support. Jeannie, Jean, and Bruce, and then in attendance, Stu, Brian, Dan Monks, and Cat TV. Is that how you want it to show?
I think that's acceptable.
Okay,
I'm sure Jeannie will speak up if it's not.
okay, okay.
Thank you.
So do we have to approve the minutes?
Does anyone have any other changes before we approve them?
I move we approve the minutes.
Seconded.
Second.
Oh, sorry, who seconded?
Ben did.
Okay, so we now have to do the vote. All in favor, say A.
Hey,
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, so I think we are set on minutes. So now I'm going to turn the meeting over to Brian Core and Cameron. I think I'm going to mispronounce your last name, so if you could just let me know how it's pronounced correctly, that would be wonderful.
McElhenney,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having us back, as it were. Obviously, we are here to accompany you on this journey, but I'm really glad that Cami and I are able to be here tonight to just do a relatively quick presentation around models of oversight and the process of developing recommendations for an oversight committee. So I know Cami put together just a few slides on PowerPoint just to accompany this. So I'll let Cami get that up. And so I'll be starting with the first part. Cami will take over and do the second part. And again, as I think you all know, we are resources for you in this work. So here we are, we're at the regular task force meeting. Let's see. And again, some of you may have seen this or heard this in other presentations, but just want to frame this again for people, because I know there are lots of different models out there, lots of different oversight boards, and people clearly don't want to reinvent the wheel. And at the same time, it's important to know that right now there are over 200 civilian oversight entities across the US. And we say entities because some are boards, some are commissions, some are federal monitors for consent decrees, some are independent auditors and monitors. So there are a huge variety of ways of doing oversight, and it really varies. No two are exactly alike. Literally, you can look at different ordinances, even ordinances that have been based on other communities' ordinances, and they're still not alike because of differences in structural things like laws, but also because of the nature of the community, the reasons that oversight is being formed, the goals of the community in creating oversight. There are many different ways to do it and many different aspects of oversight that can be important. Again, the classic things we always say, most large cities have civilian oversight. So of the 10 largest US cities, Phoenix is the last, and they're in the process of developing civilian oversight and hiring people. But as you go to smaller and smaller cities, there are over 200 oversight entities, but there are approximately 18,000 police departments and law enforcement agencies across the country. So, not every place has it. And obviously as well, there are lots of small communities, tiny communities, counties that don't have any form of civilian oversight as we would define it. And the last thing on the slide, many traditionally have been formed because of specific incidents or patterns or history, but increasingly we're seeing that change. But traditional civilian oversight agency was formed in reaction to something that went terribly wrong. So let's go to the next slide, please, Cami. So again, this is going to be quick because you could do a whole hour-long session on this, but there are these three basic models. And again, people have talked about this a bit, but traditionally the most common model has been a review-focused model. It really involves generally the police department doing investigations of complaints or other issues that the oversight board or commission has responsibility for. They would then present that to the board, and it allows people to have input. And again, depending on the specific model, the specific community, it can be anything from really reviewing things and talking about it to making very specific recommendations that the police chief or police commissioner has to respond back to in writing. And it really depends on, again, the needs of the community, the size of the department, and what's going on. But it's an important way to allow community members to have involvement, to have a voice, to allow people who are not part of that law enforcement agency in any way to really look at what's happening. And it really allows people in the community to have more insight into what the work is, but also what the problems are, how to solve them. And it gives the community a conduit to make concerns known. In many cases, that review board, that review commission will have a role in accepting complaints, whether that's done through staffing or some other model. The second model I'll talk about quickly is the auditor monitor focused model. This is increasingly common. We're seeing this more in mid to large size cities where they want to be able to, deal with complaints directly perhaps, but they really want to look at where are the broader patterns. If you're in a city of 200,000 people, maybe there are 100,000 calls for service a year and hundreds of encounters that police officers have with residents and others in the course of a day. There may be things that are not specific complaints, but they could be broader patterns. You think about things like stop and frisk in New York City. Those are the kinds of things that auditors and monitors can really look at. Now, often, I'll say a little bit about hybrids in a moment, but often they can be paired with oversight boards, or they may have some role in investigations. So there's lots of different ways those can be structured, but the basic idea is that you're looking at a way to promote systemic change and to often have a bit more authority, and they do a lot of reporting in most cases. And then the investigation focus model is what I think most people who are aware of oversight typically think of. It's an entity outside of the police department with trained investigators. And again, depending on the size of the community, there may be 100 investigators that work for that agency, or there may be 1 or 2 private investigators who are kind of on contract, on retainer, to do investigations when they come up, when there are complaints that need to be investigated. But those investigation focused models really do have a lot of the same aspects of an internal affairs model in terms of, for the police department, in terms of how they investigate, how they're trained to do investigations, how they weigh evidence, talk to witnesses, things like that. They often do have a board or commission. And that will just, because I'm trying to be aware of time, that will just lead me into hybrid models. This is something that we are seeing in more and more places. So there are hybrid agencies and hybrid systems. A hybrid system, which I'll say less about, is what you might see in a place like Seattle, Washington. So Seattle has the Office of Professional Accountability, which is what's normally thought of as internal affairs, but it's actually located outside of the police department and led by someone who is not a police officer who comes out of policing in the particular case of the current person. And that is the entity that does all of the work of an internal affairs or professional standards unit. They also have a police auditor, and that person, as I kind of described, does the traditional work of auditing the department and looking at those issues around policing. And they have a community police commission, which is a way to have more of an influence on policies and procedures and really to hear the voice of the community and bring that into the conversations. Seattle is a city of 700,000 people, long history of very specific issues, very diverse city. So that's a hybrid system. A hybrid agency is, again, something we're seeing increasingly where you will have aspects of those 3 models that I just talked about. So you might have an independent auditor or monitor, but you also have a citizen or civilian or community review board. And maybe you're also taking complaints in and being part of those investigations. In a lot of places, that independent police auditor or monitor will be integrated into the investigations of complaints. In other places, not so much. Some places, that person does the investigations completely and then works with perhaps staffs a board of residents in the community who are, again, looking at those complaints, looking at the investigative reports, and making determinations about what to do with them. And I think so many communities are looking at hybrid agencies because it's a way to kind of tailor the different aspects of oversight to the needs and resources and concerns of your specific community. So I think I'm going to stop with that. And I haven't looked at the slide deck in the last few hours, but I believe, Cami, you're taking over from here. So I will hand it off to Cami McElhenney.
Thank you, Brian. So I get the job tonight of talking to you about the process of developing recommendations for civilian oversight. So, You are one of many task forces or commissions across the country that are doing this very work right now. And what I want to do is lay out a few things that might kind of give you a platform to build your process from, to hopefully make this an easier journey for you. So a couple things I want to start by saying before we really get into this consideration slide is, I think it's important to remember that in creating civilian oversight mechanisms, it's really important to take time to learn about civilian oversight, to really think about how will we build something that is effective for the goals that we have for our community, and how it will be sustainable over time. And I also want to throw out the word scalable. So a lot of times when I talk to communities, we, and Brian and I, as we're talking to you throughout this process, may say, well, like Brian just did, he talked about Seattle. Well, Seattle's a very different city than Bennington. But the thing is that as we're seeing more and more civilian oversight throughout the country, when I talk to smaller communities, and I mentioned, for instance, the Civilian Complaint Review Board in New York City, they're like, no, we're not New York City. And the thing is, well, I mean, no one's New York City. They have 35,000 police officers. However, their Civilian Review Board is doing a few things that others could scale down and use because they're effective practices. And I can tell you with great certainty that there are a lot of smaller jurisdictions out there that are doing things that larger cities could learn a thing or two from. So just remember, it can be scaled up, it can be scaled down. So never be worried about or concerned by looking at examples that might seem like they're for cities that are too different from yours, because there could be some practices in there that are very helpful. And I also I always want to kind of give a little context to that number that Brian threw out about the 18,000 law enforcement agencies versus 200 civilian oversight entities. So since May of last year, with the murder of George Floyd, NACO alone has talked to over 150 jurisdictions who are like yours, who are working to implement civilian oversight of law enforcement. So we're seeing tremendous growth, and most of that growth is in small and medium-sized jurisdictions. And I also think it's important to note that over half of law enforcement agencies in the country have 10 or fewer officers. 90% of that 18,000 is 50 or fewer officers. So that's a lot of times, that's why we haven't seen civilian oversight yet in those areas, because a lot of times people are like, oh, well, we're small, we don't need that. And I think what they're now seeing is that it can be scalable to meet a jurisdiction's need, no matter what size. So with that basis of information, normally we break down the recommendations that eventually are made into 4 different areas. So purpose, what is the purpose of the organization? And for those of you who have looked at some of the ordinances that Brian had sent, all of them have a purpose. Sometimes it's a very detailed purpose, sometimes it's just a blurb. Also composition, who will make up this review board or oversight mechanism that you're recommending? What kind of training will those involved in the oversight mechanism be required to have? Because I will say, as someone who served on a civilian review board for 6 years, there's a tremendous learning curve. Although people come in with the best of intentions, they often have, I mean, I myself was there because I saw the need, but I didn't know anything about law enforcement policies or procedures. I knew nothing about civilian oversight. And so part of the required training for us was to learn about policies and procedures, to do ride-alongs with officers, to have conversations, and then also learn about that civilian oversight was much bigger than what was going on in our community. And at that time in 1998, it wasn't much bigger than what was going on in our community, but it was definitely bigger than ourselves. And then lastly, the powers and duties of the entity. And so I'm going to just very quickly, in consideration of time, kind of talk about some of the examples about purpose, so that you can kind of understand what I'm talking about here. So these are examples of things that are included in other oversight entities' purpose sections. That law enforcement responds to the needs of the community, and that the law enforcement agency or the oversight entity helps build trust, to develop public trust, legitimacy, and cooperation. Trust is all over this page. To provide additional perspectives to alleged police misconduct, to encourage civilians to take part in the process, to reach independent determinations that are supported by evidence. And I can tell you that as we go through this, and we'll provide these slides so you can have these examples.
Thank you.
Absolutely. This random box to the left of these, what I often do with communities is after you've had time to look at some examples, look at some ordinances, then the next step in the process is starting to brainstorm. What in your community would purpose look like? What are the things that you want to include? And then from there, moving on to creating drafts, and then having, so that you have something to discuss and edit and change into a final format. So this is just one example of how this process can work, but I have found that this provides somewhat of a roadmap to the process that tends to make it seem a little less overwhelming, because I do understand why that might be. I know I would be overwhelmed at this point in the process without having had prior civilian oversight experience. So next we have, composition. So some things to consider here, and it's amazing how involved the conversation about composition can become. But it's not just the number of members, but who's the appointing authority? How do you make sure that the board reflects the community? Do you include sworn law enforcement in any capacity on the board? What are the residency requirements? Are there any age restrictions? There are some oversight entities who have been very specific about who can be on the board. And there are some that have been very broad in their in what they have put in the ordinance. But I can tell you that both of those come with some difficulties. Those who have made it very specific have run into trouble, such as if it's so specific and you don't have someone out there to meet the qualifications for that particular vacancy, then it takes a long time to fill vacancies until that person just happens to decide that they want to be on the board. We've also seen, we're watching a lawsuit in Madison, Wisconsin, where were so specific about those who were appointed to the board that now they are being sued for instating quotas. So we're waiting to see what happens there. But the other bit is, if it's so broad, sometimes you get to a point where in order to fill the board, maybe you're not getting all of the voices in the community that you could. So it's about striking a happy medium. And then also making sure that you have young, old, everyone in between, and different lived experiences. So all of those things are things to think about when you're talking about composition. Next, we have training. As I said before, the learning curve is large. Also, it needs to be a consideration. It's very interrelated to composition, because when you're appointing people to this board, it has to be very clear about the time commitment that is involved. I'm working with a board in Cedar Rapids right now that has a requirement of 30 hours of training with the police department, 12 hours of training with NACOL, ride-alongs once they come back online as well. And so all of a sudden the board is like, that is a lot. And so just finding people that know that they have the time to do that can also be something that you need to consider. So in training comes from a lot of different sources, but It's important to know about police department operations, policies, practices, procedures. I find it very important to know also how are officers trained. Police, it's good to know about police oversight, community policing, constitutional rights, civil liberties, about the actual ordinance guiding them. You know, what does the complaint process look like? What does a good investigation look like? Confidentiality requirements, ethics, public records. All of these things are very important to consider. And it's a matter of deciding what you recommend as required or suggested. And so those are all things to consider as well. And then finally, we get into the powers and duties. So there are some, if we're just talking, for instance, about review boards, there are some out there that are, they strictly review internal affairs investigations of misconduct complaints. And they decide whether or not they agree with the internal affairs investigation. There are some also that make recommendations regarding policies, practices, and procedures, and then along with that also training. Some participate by having a member of the board sit on a committee who's in charge of hiring the chief in some cities. Authorities in some include access to records, adopting rules and regulations to conduct its business. And that is particularly important as a means for, in many jurisdictions, so that they have additional levels of independence. Some have the ability to propose their own budgets, annual reporting requirements, recommendations of additional investigation of complaints, and very importantly, what will community and stakeholder outreach look like? I can't emphasize enough how civilian oversight is in an excellent position to be the conduit between community and law enforcement. There's a lot of room in there for them to bring the two sides together, to facilitate discussions, and also talk about accountability and transparency, and really push those two things forward. So a lot of ordinances and recommendations that we see talk about what community and stakeholder outreach will look like for the oversight mechanism. So those are some examples. I do think breaking it down into those 4 categories really helps to kind of think about it and move through the process easily. But that's really, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, but I will provide these slides for you so you have some of those examples. And I can also, as you start to talk about more about purpose and training and all of those pieces, we do have ordinance examples where we've kind of highlighted those pieces throughout to help in that work as well, if you find that necessary.
And this is kind of fairly unrelated, but before we end the NACOL section, I'm not sure if there'll be time for questions for Cami or me, but someone mentioned about talking about the name, and that's why I say it's not really related, but I actually, the co-chairs had that on a draft agenda, and I actually suggested that it might be something that would be better done later in the process after you've really thought more about what exactly is the purpose and the powers and duties, as opposed to trying to come up with the name before you've really defined what this oversight entity will be and what it will do. So just for clarification. So I think we're handing it back to the co-chairs now.
Thank you, Brian, Kimmy. Thank you very much. And I do think that's incredibly helpful. Putting things into sort of 4 distinct buckets, if you will, is a good way to organize moving forward, and I think addresses some of the questions that we all have struggled with a bit as a group, which is wanting to get me too detailed at this stage, needing to pull back a little bit and stay at sort of more the 30,000 foot view in how we structure the actual committee moving forward. So thank you. I do want to turn it over to you.
I think
Margaret,
we
you just
lost
broke
you.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah, your sound just came off, Margay.
So on to our next one. Does anyone
Sound
have any?
okay?
Oh, did we get you back, Margay?
I'm back.
Okay. You cut out for a little bit. So we got to the point of you're going to turn it over to
Marsh.
Thank
Okay.
you.
So I'm going to share my screen, hopefully, with this report back from our subcommittee meeting. Here we go. We met on the 13th, Clark, Sarah Beth, Ben, and I, and we wanted to explore the purpose for a Safety and Equity Board that we're all working to create. We followed a process of brainstorming where everybody pitched in ideas and no one criticized anybody else's ideas, but we tried to improve and refine our ideas together. And we learned a lot from each other. And Ben only had to arrest 2 of us. No, that's not true. I'm kidding. We had a good time. In preparation, we each studied the slideshow for Brian's initial presentation and did our own independent reading and thinking. And these are the hopes that have arisen from our meeting and further reflections for the Safety and Equity Board. I hope we'll get to hear the hopes and concerns and dreams of our whole task force and our wider community of police and citizens. And that as a result, our energy and vision and ownership may grow. And it's interesting how, to me, how the last thing you talked about in Cam in your presentation was ownership, because I think it's, in my mind, one of the first things. And hopefully as we explore purpose together, we can get energy going to support this. We haven't had, I don't think, an excess of community participation in the development of policies and procedures. And my hope is that we can really get a lot of participation in viewing what are our goals and hopes. So here we go to look at some of the things that we came up with. We had a lot of ideas. There are, I think, 25, but not all of them will be things that will necessarily be in our defined purpose. They're just things that we thought about that we wanted to accomplish in this process. And so as I'm going down through our list, I'd like to suggest that you feel free to interrupt with, yay, that sounds exciting, or whoa, what do you mean? Or what's that about? So if there's any questions along the line or any input to encourage us or to say, whoa, let's not do that, we can hear that. So the first is to involve a wide range of citizen input through our task force process and with the work of the board, which is just what Cami talked about. Another thing that came up was wanting to both listen really effectively to the community and act upon the things that people are bringing to our attention, so that there's not only a public voice, but there's a sense of public influence on how policing happens. And one of our team members talked about how they felt like this listening process was a part of the whole community's need to give feedback to how our community government is functioning. And presently there's a survey going on. I don't know if you've all participated in it or not, but to evaluate how our town government is functioning. Any questions or boos or yays or anything so far?
No, I just want to add that if anyone's interested in taking the survey, it is on the Town of Bennington website as well, too.
Yes. Third, this has got a lot of stuff in it. Make the complaint complement process. And we talked about in our vision, having this be a process that invites compliments as well as complaints. And I suppose some of it might have come from my own life experience. When I was a minister, I had a committee that provided oversight of me, and they always made sure that they were looking for compliments as well as things that people didn't like, so that I didn't go to every meeting in fear and trembling and crawl out the door feeling like I've been beaten up. And we'd hope that whatever we create can be that kind of a balanced, both support and challenge to our police officers. So that the process become clear, accessible to everyone easily, that you can find it, that it's safe, so that people don't have to be afraid of retribution. I've heard personally from a number of people who are really afraid to say anything because they fear retribution and they're convinced it's going to happen if they say something. And leading to effective investigation and embracing mistakes as well as successes, and then following through with remediation. Is that making sense to everybody? Okay. Fourth one, this one I like the best. Remember that we're all human. We're in this together. And so whether we're dealing with complaints or compliments, that we're not out there with hatchets at each other or guns pointed at each other, but we're seeing ourselves as in this together. Fifth, that we recommend and perhaps participate in training based on what we learn about the community and the police department and from data. Sixth, yes.
Well,
Oh,
as we
good.
go through this is probably a stupid question, but as we go through this and we're talking about training and all that great stuff, are these going to be paid board members or are they all going to be volunteers? Is there any money to support any of this?
I think that's a great question. And we haven't begun to discuss it yet, I don't think, but it's a great one that we should talk about.
Oh, nobody on the select board has discussed it as they talked about setting it up? Nothing? No?
I haven't heard anything about payment except, there's been a group that's been working on one proposal that we'll be thinking about. And in that it proposes that the members of this board would be paid the same as the select board, which if I remember correctly, is a whopping $100 a month or something of that sort.
Okay.
So what you might call that pay, but you might not.
Yeah. So, yeah, I just think that's an important consideration when we talk about the amount of training and the amount of work we're going to be requiring the board to do. Thanks.
Yes, that's great. So let's put this in our list of things to sort out in terms of how we'll operate. 6 is to provide independence to the board from outside control and access to the people and information needed to accurately evaluate criticisms. That's a big mouthful, and I think an important dynamic that our little group thought of. 7th, understand and interface with the internal BPD complaint process. And one of the things we looked at was an article about the Ann Arbor Police Oversight Program. And since that had been an influential part of one of the models we're looking at, it caught our attention because they had some difficulty as they got working because they had numerous complaints and they didn't have a real timetable. So like the police department got complaints coming in 1 month, and then they were trying to work on those and others came in, and it was hard to keep track of what was getting done by who, when. And at the end of 2 years, they had not resolved a single complaint. And so they have started to utilize a spreadsheet to keep track of each one of the complaints and where it is in the system, and setting up a timetable that guided them in the processing of those complaints so that they could keep an eye on each of them. Does that make any sense? No? Yes?
Marsh, was that the board who was taking care of the complaints, or did that board in Ann Arbor just have a review role and have?
They definitely were taking care of complaints. They had
okay.
20 complaints in the 2 years that they've been trying to work, and there were struggles also. There were power struggles, and we saw that in Burlington too, Vermont, where the police and the Oversight Committee got into a fight over who was, over who had what power and who were the bad guys and the good guys. And I think all of our discussion in our subcommittee agreed that we really didn't want to get into that kind of a situation.
Marsh, I do see that Cammie's hands up as well too.
Go Cammie.
Yeah, I just wanted to interject too about Ann Arbor. I think one of the things to kind of keep in the back of your mind about that particular jurisdiction is that they also don't have any paid staff. So they are not only doing the normal work of a review board, they're also doing all of the behind the scenes and the staff and all of it. And so that's, I think, also plays into that role of how difficult it's been for them.
Mhm.
So just a little tidbit of information to keep in the back of your head too, as you're considering that.
Great, thank
And
you.
then this is Brian. I'll just say quickly, just so everyone's aware, I was asked to come up, someone asked me if I had some examples of other ordinances from sort of similar sized communities. So I didn't send those as these are the best ordinances or the only ones to look at or start with these, but just as examples. So people would have a range of things to look at as you're doing your own work. So don't feel that any of those was sent as this is the really great model that you should emulate. It's more informational. Okay, thank you.
So it's me again. I'm sorry to be so thick, but if I understand it correctly, whatever we recommend does not have to be a board who does the investigation of the complaint. It could be a board that reviews the investigation that's completed by the police department. Is that correct? Are those two?
That's right.
Okay. All
Yeah,
right.
definitely. And that'd be one of our decisions to make, or it might be again, a mix of those, if I understand it correctly, because sometimes there are internal investigations that are triggered by people making complaints to the police. And sometimes there might be complaints that were made to the review board, and how the complaint process worked would be part of what we'd have to sort out.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding, and I might be wrong about this, but it's my understanding that in the state of Vermont, the law is that a complaint against the police department has to go through an internal police process or an internal police investigation before anybody else can do any other entity can do an investigation of it. Do you guys know if that's accurate?
I know that that's how I looked up the Vermont State Police, their investigation process, and I know that's how they do it, but they also have an IA department to handle it and manage it. But that's how they do it. It's all internal. I don't know if that's the law, but.
So it sounds like this is something we want to investigate more, investigations. But so that we know what the laws require. And so the main point that we had here was, let's see, where were we?
If I may jump in, Mark, to clarify that question. Currently, the law in Vermont provides that the complaint against a police officer is generally investigated by the chief or his designee. And then if there is wrongdoing found, depending on the level of wrongdoing and where it fits within the law itself, which was originally Act 56, that complaint or investigation would be turned over to, once it's concluded, either if there are criminal charges, it goes to a state agency. It also can be reviewed by your civilian oversight group, if in fact that exists. The select board has acted in that role in the recent past, and the manager has acted in that role further back. So depending on how you frame your purpose and your capacity, this group may end up actually reviewing the police chief's investigation. If the chief commits wrongdoing, then that is investigated by the state, the Criminal Justice Council.
So my understanding is correct then that a complaint has to go through an internal police investigation first before it can be turned over to another entity? That it
Yes.
has to be done that way by law?
Yes.
Okay,
That's
That
the way
was-
the
I wasn't
law
certain.
is set up, yes.
okay. So that kind of, in a way, dictates a piece of how our boards, our civilian boards, complaint process is going to have to work, because we'll have to jive with that state law.
Yes, you must comply with that, with the law.
And I think we have some options too about who collects complaints. I'm not sure that the law requires that the police department collect the complaints. And I think some of the stuff that I've seen anyway has options for anonymous complaints and identified complaints. So, you know, I think this whole area is something that we'll probably want to get a group of us to learn about and sort out. We ready to move on?
Sounds good.
Okay, so understand and interface, this is number 7, sort of what we've just been talking about, with the internal Bennington Police Department complaint process, and perhaps create a timetable. Number 8, front end and back end accountability. We read this in our group and I didn't know what front end and back end accountability was. I didn't know whether back end accountability meant cover your butt or what this was about. But I think it became clear, thanks to some help of the other committee members, that back end accountability is after there's something that happens that doesn't work out very well. You look at what happened and try to figure out a better way to go at it, which gives you the front end accountability, where you try to set up practices and policies that will try to reduce the chances of having that same mess happen again and make things work more smoothly.
And can I just, Clark has his hand up, if you don't mind, just to interrupt one moment.
Yes, good afternoon. I have a couple of issues, and you're talking about the board, and I don't think our subcommittee really covered it. And one of my concerns is issues of liability. Is this committee going to be fact finding, so to speak, to where we say so and so has misbehaved or has performed inappropriately in their duties? What would the liability for committee members be in cases like this? And our relationship, I guess, with the town's liability carrier and the town attorney or whoever is the legal representative for the town.
That's 21 on our list, Clark, right?
Oh, I didn't realize we did.
That's all right.
Okay.
It's good. And it's good you bring it up because it's important. Because we don't
And I
want
would
to.
ju- if I could jump in again,
Yes.
boards and commissions appointed by the select board are protected under the town's insurance for professional liability.
Great. And Clark, was there something else you wanted to focus on here? I can't hear you. Clark, I think you turned yourself off maybe.
Okay. All right. Yeah, no, that's fine. Now that you see 21, and Stuart has cleared up what I had
Okay.
concerns with, but thanks.
Okay. Number 9, help police to discern when police should intervene, when others take the lead, and how they work together. This is sort of taking off from the state use of force policies and trainings that the chief and lieutenant, and I think some of the other officers have been to lately. It's a sort of unfolding investigation to sort of what questions do we want our police to be stepping into, and what ones do we want to encourage them to keep their nose out of so they don't get into messes that aren't really needed for them. Number 10, no, not feelings enforcement, helping citizens to respect the diversity and freedom to be themselves. This was sort of reflected on as we talked about how sometimes people call the police because their neighbor's cat is walking close to their fence, or all these little kinds of personal whims that we seek to get the police to enforce for us, and trying to disconnect ourselves from that kind of being drawn into that kind of triangle. 11, build transparency while respecting confidentiality. and working out the conflicts between them. This came out of the awareness that when the select board tried to deal with serving as a police oversight in a recent time, they received guidance that got them into quite a pickle about violating confidentiality. And it seems like part of building trust is being transparent, and part of honoring confidence is in contrast to that. So trying to figure out how our board can do both of those things and not get into hot water or allow put people in positions where their confidences are violated. Does that make sense to people? 12, rebuild trust where it's missing and sustain it. I think that's been all over the stuff you've been mentioning to us. Focused collection and processing of data that will help us achieve our goal, particularly the traffic stop data that we already have. I think in our training, Paul talked about seeking to find some staff support to manage the body camera footage, because they're getting all kinds of footage, and what do you do with all that? And how do you make it accessible? 14, try to be fair for all and identify biases, including implicit ones among the police department, and then train and supervise to transform them. 15, all police welcoming, respectful, and concerned for the safety of all people, and being aware that police are often the first and only representatives of our town that visitors and citizens meet. We still together here? Concerns? We covered
You're doing great.
Covered a lot of territory. Service over self, increasing a service-minded attitude among the police department officers and dispatchers. 17, BPD members develop excellence in listening and communicating. 18, active collaboration with groups and agencies with needed skills and resources. 19, build a sense of community and community policing. 20, create a board of people skilled in data analysis. So this is looking at some of the composition issues, just some initial thoughts that we had. Having somebody who could manage data. I remember hearing about data and statistics in the psychology course, and that went right over my head. So it would seem like having somebody on this board that was good in that area would be important. Somebody with legal expertise, somebody with mental health background. Paul told us that half the people that the law enforcement officers are dealing with have mental health issues. So we definitely would need that skill on our team, and understanding marginal lives and the systems and experiences that create them. Trying to build a real understanding amongst the board and the force of what it's like for people who are at the edges. 22, encourage officer support and well-being. We really heard Paul when he talked about the officer who suicided, and a concern that we not just grind officers down to the ground and then they crawl out the door, but being supportive of the police officers, as well as being supportive of the community in their concerns, so that this is not a one-sided process, but really a concern for all.
I just want to check in for one moment. I see Clark has his hand up, and I want to
Go
sure
ahead.
if he has a question.
Good.
No, that's an error. I didn't realize it hadn't been taken down from our previous.
No worries. I just want to make sure we weren't skipping over you.
No, everything's fine. I apologize for that.
Good. Coming down the home stretch, educate the community about police work. One of the ideas was maybe have ride-alongs once in a while. That sounded like it could be interesting, maybe scary, but educational. 24, increase collaboration with people who are marginalized by race, gender, income, illness, abilities. Particularly, this is with the police force, so that they can understand and empower the people they're working with. And finally, recruitment, develop practices that entice people who look like our community to join our police, perhaps looking for fellow citizens who would make good police officers. We also began to look at communities where police oversight had gotten stuck. We want to create a board that refuses to get locked in power struggles and opposition to the BPD. Rather, we want to embrace learnings, mistakes, changes, progress, and help every citizen, including the Bennington Police Department, to be our best and work together for the safety and well-being of us all. Which leads us to the question of what goals do you share? What would you improve or add? A next step in seeking ownership of police oversight process might be to solicit the hopes and concerns of you, our wider task force, our community, and its groups and stakeholders. Next meeting, November 1st. Ben, Clark, and Marsh, and Sarah Beth.
That's great, Marsh. Thank you very much.
Very nice.
That's a lot to take in. I think we want to just get some feedback from people.
I see Lynn has her hand up.
Yeah, one of the things I was reading this over before we met, Marsh emailed it to us, and I was struck by how a lot of what's in here is covered in the ordinance that I sent out. And specifically, like in the purpose section, which is like the second section of the ordinance, there's already kind of a draft of a possible purpose that includes a lot of what I'm seeing on what this subgroup generated. So I'm wondering if it makes sense to look at that purpose section in that ordinance draft that I sent you guys and see if we want to just wordsmith that and make the wording in that match kind of the wording that the subgroup came up with. If that makes sense as a next step in terms of getting purpose nailed down.
So I just say a word that I guess I like that. I like looking at that ordinance in relation to its sense of purpose. But my personal hope is that we can do more outreach to elicit people's visions of what we're trying to accomplish before we get to trying to write out our purpose. Because I'd like to talk to, personally anyways, I'd like to go talk to people who are living in poverty, people in the BIPOC community, people who feel at the edge of society in our town, and see what their hopes and concerns are before we go write out our purpose and then just try to sell it. That seems like it wouldn't really claim ownership from people as well. But I'm really happy to look to that ordinance to see when we get ready to write it all up, see how that's gone about it.
I liked that as well, as an overall purpose statement. I also liked the mission and vision statement from Ann Arbor, which is very brief. Then I think you could go on to define tasks. So I like that approach of having a general statement and then maybe a list of goals for the group under that vision statement. So I also agree with Marsh that getting all of the goals that we would like together by talking to our community and then going back to that vision statement or that purpose statement and wordsmithing a couple of those together would be a good approach. There's one group too that's marginalized that I don't see like spelled out in many things, and that's the homeless, which I think is really important in our community to try to get a sense of what they feel would help them with police interactions or how a board might be helpful to them.
So I've heard that from a couple of people now about sourcing the community. One way to do that is
Margay, we lost you again, your audio.
It might help, Margay, if you turn off your video while you speak, because yeah, we're not getting a sound, although we can see your face moving.
Can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Any rate, about sourcing the community, how is the best way to do that? Could we put some kind of survey together that has really detailed questions? Could we make outreach to some of these groups in the community?
We've tried, like, I was part of the group that helped try to collect stories when the IACP came. And like your head goes right to survey, right? That seems like an easy way to collect a lot of information from a lot of people quick. The problem we found with like things in writing is that you miss out on anybody who's not comfortable reading and writing, anybody who's not comfortable filling out a form. It's really hard to find the homeless folks to get them to sit down and do a form. So like, I don't want to be the person who like presents the problem with no solution, but like we've bumped into this before a lot where like the reason why these populations are marginalized is because they're in the margins, like they're hard to reach out to and really connect with. And we've tried a lot of different things and I think they're all worth trying, but it is a really hard ask.
I see Cammie has her hand up as well too.
So that problem, particularly as it relates to trying to get the input from the community, is a problem that a lot of jurisdictions face. And some try the surveys, and what they find is that a lot of times with surveys, they end up hearing from the same people that they hear from frequently, even with outreach to those groups. One of the interesting ways that we've seen communities try to get new perspective and a more holistic perspective is through, you know, they get called different new fancy things depending on where you go, but community cafes is kind of the current term that I'm hearing a lot for them. And they can look different. Like you can have a library full of different groups sitting at different tables, doing facilitated discussions and gathering that qualitative data from that group. Another way you can do is you can go out and talk to members of the houseless population who are maybe not going to, you know, see a flyer and come to a meeting, but whose opinion and needs are very valuable in the process. It also is a way to target conversations with immigrant populations that might not feel comfortable showing up in a group situation. And so you can get a lot of information. I will say the downside is that it's so much easier to synthesize data that's A, B, or C than all of this qualitative data. But if what you really want to hear is voices from the community, that tends to be a way that you can do that. And you can also find kind of disinterested groups or members, people outside of your community to come in and facilitate those discussions. So maybe any real or perceived bias is taken out of them. So there's lots of, and as you get to that point, I'm happy to talk with you further, but I want to know that that's something that we've seen in other communities. That's kind of a new approach to it that seems to be helpful.
It would be nice if we had any, if we could set up even a few open-ended questions. I'm wondering if it's feasible or appropriate even if, for example, chatting with people as they come and go from food banks, from our from those resources, or visiting a homeless shelter or a mental health shelter. Is there any way we could do that? I wouldn't mind interviewing several people from, if they wanted to talk with me, I'd like to have the questions sort of pre-done.
So does it make sense for us to think about someone coming up with a list of questions and then identifying who we'd like to outreach to?
Yeah, and I think if some of them are open-ended, like Gail just suggested, and some of them may be specific,
Right.
like, you know, who would you like to have? What kind of folks would you like to have on such a board? or what are you afraid of, or what would make a board like really helpful, or, you know, a mix of those kinds of things that would open the door. And then, yeah, so that list of questions sounds great.
And my other question is if Cammie or Brian has any resources on community cafes or maybe surveys that were put out already, we could kind of take a look at those as well too and get some ideas. Do we want to do a subcommittee for those?
I think we should. And then those can be brought back to the next everybody meeting.
That sounds good to me.
Should we make a, go ahead.
I was gonna say, just remember, we can't have more than 4 is our top number of participants we can have in the subcommittee. So just something to think about going forward.
Does anybody want to nominate themselves? Join the subcommittee?
I would volunteer for that.
Thank you, Gail.
I will as
Alone?
well.
Who was the second person?
I'll do it.
Thank you, Lauren.
I would also like to add as far as like outreach to substance abuse treatment.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would love to see this group come up with a list of questions, some open-ended, as Marsh pointed out, but at least we're all getting the same, we're asking the same questions, right? However they go out. And then alongside that, I don't know if it's too much, a suggested list of who to outreach to. Since we're already starting to brainstorm those ideas, like Turning Point, right? And Pave.
Yes. I don't know if you're familiar with the Walloomsac Walk, but there was a
Yes.
murder along the Walloomsac Walk about a year ago, and there's been a walk every month. And each month in that walk, we stop to talk with people about a particular resource or issue. So like Turning Point did one of those, but our group might well do host one of those walk discussions where there are a variety of different folks who are hanging out there with us to elicit this kind of feedback. So it'd be another setting for doing that.
That's a great idea.
Great. Okay. And anyone else interested in joining the subcommittee?
I will.
Thank you, Margay. Okay, and I'm gonna say one more time, and otherwise I think we're good on that. Okay, so for that subcommittee, we have Gail, Lauren, and Margay.
Can we go on a screen share so I can see all your faces again?
Yes. Do I have to do something to get out of that?
Yeah, it should
Stop.
say
Yes.
stop.
There
Yeah.
you go. Good.
And then any other thoughts on the subcommittee that we just went over with Marsh, Ben, Sarah Beth, and I'm missing one. I apologize.
I do have one thing to add to that. On number 23, educating the community about police work, we talk about ride-alongs. I thought that, you know, in part of our training as a task force, we did a day or a night rather with the police chief, where he was able to kind of give, I would call it a civilian police academy, you know, almost in a way where it allows people to, from the community, to be able to sit down, learn about what policing looks like in Vermont, or specifically in Bennington, what police officers can do, what they can't do, and you know what actually they're responsible for. But it allows also a dialogue to start happening between community members and members of the police department, and that doesn't necessarily have to just be, you know, with the police chief, you know, because you're not, you know, 9 times out of 10, you're not going to see the police chief out on the street. You know, he's got a lot of responsibilities. You're going to see the general officers that are responding to calls, and so I thought that was, you know, there was a lot of stuff even I learned, because, you know, I'm, you know, a fair amount of administrative stuff I'm not involved in. So I learned about some stuff too while we had that. And I thought that was just, you know, I've seen that come up in a couple different models that we were looking at, where they included, I believe it was called the civilian police academies or community police academies, where they just have that Q&A and get to learn about. And I thought that was extremely, I thought it was a great idea.
That's great.
I think it definitely helps me to understand too, as not being a part of law enforcement or having much knowledge. So I think that's a great point.
One more thing about the data. I'm sorry, I can't remember which community I looked at, but I was looking at, I'll find it. I was looking at some forms that different people use to collect a complaint or a compliment. And one of them included what looked to me to be the federal Q&A about people's gender, race, so that when data is collected, if they choose to share it, people would actually have data to look at. I mean, I think that's an important part of the complaint and compliment process, is to see who's bringing forth the issues. And then the review board, or whatever they're called, will be able to collect data about, are they all treated the same way? Are they all timely? That just going forward, we might look at some ways to collect that type of data.
Thank you, Gail. And I think we briefly discussed that when we're talking about the reports for police officers make, that they have to do their
Yes.
perceived race. So this might help give us a little bit more data of what people self-identify as.
Right, right. Thank you.
Are we getting to a point where we need to have the public input?
I think it'd be
We're not
really
quite there.
helpful. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Margay.
Oh, I just didn't know if you were talking about the public comment period
Yes.
or that we were inviting comments at the point.
Oh.
Is that what you meant, Marsh?
Yeah, I was just looking at my clock and wondering, because I know we had to have some time for that.
Yeah, we do
did
have
that.
that.
End of the agenda.
Okay.
And I apologize. I thought you meant looking at how to get public comment, which is like the survey that we're doing. So I apologize for that confusion in that. The other points I would say I liked about yours is I think that, you guys put a lot of thought into it. It's really well done. But just a caution to make sure we're not getting into those minute details and kind of remember like the overall picture, which I had trouble with at first. So really just looking at it for more of a wider lens. Because if we get down into those nitty gritty details, we're going to lock a board into something they may not be able to keep up with. So as we go forward, just kind of keeping that in mind. And any other comments on the subcommittee we just reviewed? Okay, I think we can move on.
That sounds good. We're going to talk about composition now.
Do we have an end time that we have to finish by, or can we just continue on until we finish?
We have it till 6:30. The last 10 minutes
Okay.
though is public comment, so we
Okay.
should be finishing it by 6:20.
Okay, great.
So how do we want to transition into composition, since we already had some discussion, right, about sourcing community input before we necessarily finalize what composition might look like? What are people's thoughts on that?
Oh, and Brian has his hand up.
Yeah, this is just a thought. I guess my suggestion would be to sort of, as you said a little bit ago, April, kind of focus on high level things, because this will be something that continues to come up as you get clearer on the purposes and the, powers and duties. So maybe just, I would suggest maybe have a general conversation and not sort of trying to lay out, oh, we need 7 people and 2 from this group and 1 with that background and 1 from this part of Bennington, and but to think more broadly about the role, what the composition could look like and what that would do to help the board meet its purpose.
Great.
I wonder, does the town of Bennington have any demographics in terms of male, female, race? That would be helpful if we're going to want to include everyone. Immigrants.
We
I
may
think
be able to pull some of that information from the census data. We generally don't collect it ourselves. But I can look into that.
Might help.
So any thoughts, maybe start with like the general thing about a number we'd like to see on a board?
I'm afraid you guys are gonna get sick of hearing me say this, but on the ordinance, section 4 covers the composition, and there's a section on membership that again, it's pretty detailed, and I don't know if we want to get into all, it states how many members and how it describes an initial recruitment process for the first time this board is in place. And then it goes on to explain how membership on the board would rotate over time once it's established. And there's a section on diversity of membership, which specifically calls for it's reflective of a diverse background, including educational background, disability, primary language, income level, race, ethnicity, age, gender, sexual orientation, and life experience. Segments of the community that are vulnerable and marginalized, who tend to have significant negative interactions with the police, must be represented. Applicants' skills, expertise, and life experiences bearing on the work of the board will be considered, including those with applicable experience in mediation, conflict resolution, mental health, housing, homelessness, anti-racist and equity reform, transformative justice, contact with police, law enforcement, and the criminal justice system. That's all in there. So again, I just keep having this feeling like that could be a focus point where we could use that to kind of focus and edit what we think, while comparing that to what other towns are doing.
Which gave us a great idea. I think, for me at least, to think of who to be included. My only concern is if we say that we need like one member of like every category, how we're going to meet that. If people don't volunteer, and then kind of like Brian and Kimmy was saying earlier, they kind of got to the point that they couldn't find people for those positions. I think that we should definitely strive for the diversity with all those groups. But I'm trying to think how we could word that so that we're not kind of locked in if we don't have anybody that would like to fill those positions.
The wording here simply says taken into account. So it
That's a
doesn't
nice
say
one.
we have to have one person who fits this category and one person for that. It's more broad than that.
I think that's a nice wording of it to kind of think about.
Under the section that says membership, I really like that it has that that there should be a youth member.
Mm-hmm.
But what age range are they thinking as far as youth? I guess that's my question.
My presumption was high school, but I
Okay.
guess that's a detail that we could be specific and specifically say a youth member age 16 to 19 or something like that.
Okay, because some people consider youth up to like 24 now.
Right.
So, if we don't lock ourselves into like, we need a 16-year-old,
Right.
give that range. But I like the idea of having a youth member, right?
Right. Yeah. So, so we could kind of play with that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
When I read that, I thought about the possibility of reaching out to the high school and wondering if the high school, if they still, like the senior year, if they still have presidents of a student council or a student body, if that would be the person who might be, that would be a great community connection for someone who's 17 or 18. And then it would be automatically rotating. Just a thought.
And I'm just looking back at our agenda. So the first question is, how does the composition help the Oversight Committee fulfill its purpose? And I think, as Lynn said, that really kind of meets all those categories that we're looking to get voices from. Any other thoughts on that question?
It seems like if I'm not sure, but I think who appoints this group, and if the select board appoints the group, there's going to be the option for the select board to apply some discretion to this process too. so that we find some balance and flexibility in that. Do we have, is that the only option? Is that the one that we really want in terms of who appoints these people on the committee, on the board?
On the wording that's here, it says the select board will publish the position and appoint an outreach coordinator who is a non-select board member who will perform outreach to organizations representing diverse populations. The select board, in conjunction with diverse representatives of the community, will plan multiple ways to inform the community about the board and the role and the expectations. An application form will be posted, translation services will be available. They can choose to apply by interview versus writing. Yeah, so this says that pretty much the select board is the appointing party the first time around. As far as going forward, I'll have to look through that. I think we'd have to pound that detail out.
And Brian has his hand up.
Thank you. Well, so 3 things now. First, I just want to let you know, unfortunately, Cammie just sent me a message. She had a family issue, so she had to jump off. So she apologizes for leaving so quickly. And then I guess 2 things. One piece is if you end up thinking about something where you want to propose lots of things, but then give the select board discretion, you could be setting the select board up for failure, or for people to feel that, well, this ordinance says all these things, or the recommendation said all these things, but the select board isn't doing it. So I think you want to be a little careful about that. And then I'm just going to say it. I've said this in different ways, but I think you do want to be careful about while using various resources, sort of taking one document as kind of the jumping off point for all of your thinking, only because you were selected by the town to do this work. And I think you want to be very thoughtful about how much of it you build off of the work of a separate group that was not selected by the town. So that's just my 2 cents as a piece of external advice.
So maybe what we would want to do is take some time to look through the selection process as it's embodied in some of the different ordinances that we have, and come back together, having looked at not only the ordinance that Lynn has for us, but also some of the other ones, to get ideas and see what rings a bell for us.
I think that could be helpful. And then maybe how members are appointed from different models throughout the country too. That would be really interesting to me. While I know our select board is our town governance, it'd be interesting to see if there's any other options out there and what would fit good for our town.
Does our commission require that the select board appoint these people? I can't remember.
I don't know if Stu might be able to answer that, or anybody else may have answers.
Or maybe text
I
support.
think it was just the initial board and the initial task force is being, but I don't think there's any edict about it moving forward.
I think that's something we're supposed to decide. I thought the commission was rather open-ended as far as there was points that we had to accomplish, but that was ours to accomplish.
Does that ring a bell to the select board members who are not here, but they're here?
Yeah, I think that's true. I don't think that there was a direction given on that issue.
Okay, good. So could we, for our next meeting, plan on each of us taking some responsibility to read some of the other ordinances that we have and look and see how the people are selected, what the composition options are, choices are, models are?
I think that would be good. I'd like to educate myself a little bit more before making a decision. Any other thoughts? But just, we do have those 2 points, so just something to think about as we're reading through there is how does the composition help the Oversight Committee fulfill its purpose? And how does the composition reflect the needs and perspectives of Bennington? So just a couple of points as we're reading through different ordinances that, relate back to this topic. So we do have about 17 minutes left before public comment. So we do have review of next steps and input for next agenda.
So we have some homework. Can, Lynn, you were taking notes, right? So far we have, would you mind just recapping for everyone what we've got as to-dos right now?
Okay, let's see. I lost my first page already. Okay. To do, I need to make those changes on the notes. Let's see. Then we have the subgroup. The subgroup that we made tonight, who's going to be looking at, who's going to be looking at the list of kind of those open-ended questions to ask the community member. And they're going to brainstorm what organizations we're going to contact for outreach and where we might focus this outreach. Let's see, and then, yeah, and then we were all going to look at the different ordinances, at the different models in those ordinances to see how different communities decided to appoint or select their boards and how that process has worked in different communities. Did I miss anything? I think that's all our homework. And then we and then it was my understanding that we put off thinking of a name until we have kind of the purpose a little more solidified. Correct? Correct. All right.
We did have a date set for our purpose subcommittee to meet on the 1st of November, but I'm wondering if we need to meet at this point. What do you think, subcommittee members? Do we need to meet on the 1st of November, or can we wait until we get a little further with our outreach?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, because I think you gave such a good presentation tonight that I don't really know what else we would be talking about at our next meeting. I think you covered it pretty well.
Okay, then why don't we just skip our November 1st meeting, and we'll just, the ball will be in the court of the new subcommittee and thinking about how to outreach and questions to raise there, and then we can all pitch in with carrying it out when they come back to us.
Stu, this is a question for you. How much kind of logistical support would be available to us when trying these different kinds of outreach things?
When you say logistical support, what are you looking for?
All of it. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Somebody.
I do have a job other than this, but.
No, I mean, helping to collate information, that kind of stuff, or is that something that the task force members should expect to do on their own?
No, any information that you folks develop that becomes accepted by the task force, such as Marsh's information tonight, we're going to take that and we're going to put it up on the town's website and distribute it to other ways through the select board and others who want to effectively stay in tune with what you're doing. So can we gather information and make it available to the committee? Yeah, we can do that. We can gather your information, make it available to the committee. We can take your completed documents and we can put them up so that they're out and available to the public. We could probably provide you with contacts of various organizations or agencies you might want to talk to if you don't have them yourselves, and many of you already work in for some of those organizations, so that may not be necessary, but we can provide that kind of support if that's what you're looking for, Lynn. I would ask that if in fact a subcommittee is, as Marcia's did, develop something that they want to send out to the whole committee, please include me, Brian, and Cam, so that we are kept abreast. And Marcia, you didn't include us in your mailing, but the chair, April did send it to us, I believe.
Okay, so that's okay.
Margay, two co-chairs, what else can we do? So that I ask is that if you're gonna be providing information to the group, we should have it, okay?
I thought I emailed it this afternoon, but it may have gone out after you've been looking. I don't know. But
Well, I haven't seen it come through, Marsh, because I've got two screens going here. So
okay,
I haven't seen it yet, but
okay.
Now, should we get that to you within 48 hours of the meeting, just so you have it, or is there a timeline?
no. In this particular case, Marsh got his information to you just before the meeting started. Whenever you distribute to the committee, distribute it to us as well. It doesn't have to be 48 hours because it's not yet a document that the committee has accepted or worked off of. It's just, something to give you a foundation for the discussions you're about to have. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Now I am looking towards our next agenda. So we do have those two pieces of homework that we're working on. But we still have lots of time. I'd like to utilize as much as possible because we have a lot of stuff to go over. So as I broke it down in the presentation with Brian and Cammie, we have purpose, which we're working on, composition, which will be our homework for next time, training, and powers and duties. Is there any other topic that we'd like to take on in the next meeting?
I think when Gail and Margay and Lauren meet, it might be helpful to us too if you do a little brainstorming about how do we record the information that we get from people in interviews or in these various settings. To do a little bit of thinking about, how do we structure the data that we're getting in those settings?
That's a very good point, Marsh. And actually, April, you and I talked very briefly when we were talking about setting up the agenda about how we're storing all this information. And I guess, most obviously, Stu, you're putting it all up on the town website so everyone has access to the same information. When we're talking about like drafts we're working on, or I don't know, maybe it's just some random thing we're sharing. Do we have like a hub? Is there like a file that we could all in the cloud that we could all be accessing just as we move forward? Because I think.
Oops, we just lost you.
Sorry, Margay, it's not coming through. So I think her basic question is there a way or any support stuff where we could store stuff that's accessible by our team?
We'll store all the hard copies here as well. Whatever documents you're preparing, we'll be keeping a book of the minutes, all of those kinds of things, so that if the public doesn't have access to the website but they want to know what's going on, they'll be able to come here, and we'll kind of be the repository for that information.
Okay, and anything like a Google Docs kind of thing that we can store all this that we.
Well, now you're asking an old dog about new tricks, and I'm sorry. I'll have to ask Jonah or somebody who knows about those things much more than I do.
Great. We're just thinking it's nice to have everything in one electronic area nowadays with everything being electronic.
Yeah, and it would be nice. It would be nice on the town website if there was like one area that we could go to that would have all of our documents in, because it is very confusing once you get in that town website. I seem to lose my mind. So if we had, one folder or one section where everything that we put on there, it would be in that neighborhood, that would be really good.
That is being done. That I
Good.
know is being done. So once you find it, you should find everything you have. And unfortunately, the name of the location escapes me at the present time, but I'll get that out to you.
Yeah, how about if you send us an email that had the URL for that location?
Yep.
That would be perfect.
And Brian has his hand up.
Well, yeah, it's just to say that part of what I heard was something about maybe having a Google Doc where people could do editing. And so you can't, that would again be a violation of open meeting law, because then that's a form of deliberation. So it's one thing to have them stored someplace. It's another thing to have people going in and making edits and commenting. So I know that can be convenient, but you probably want to avoid that. And then I know, and I will say, I have seen there is a page for this task force, and I think that there are already materials up there, so I'm guessing that's probably where they'll end up, what people are asking for. So.
Yeah, I did get an email from somebody at the town office that led me to the Safety and Equity Task Force. That does have our minutes. It does have some agenda items as well on. So I'm wondering if that would be the most convenient place.
Yeah, I'll highlight that at the address that we've selected for you, so you'll all know where it is.
Great.
So moving back, because now we have 5 minutes, we have to set an agenda or some idea of agenda for next time. In addition to the subcommittee and looking at other ordinances on composition, we also have training and powers and duties. If we are following the model that Brian and Cammie kind of let us on.
April?
Yep.
Jonah, my communications coordinator, just emailed me the link.
Great.
It's on the Bennington.org website /Safety Equity Task Force. So you have a name and everything will be there.
Great. Thank you so much.
I think between talking about composition and maybe getting into powers and duties, that's going to be a lot.
Yeah, and we'll also have all the actually embodying whatever outreach we're going to do. When our subcommittee comes back, that's going to be a project, I think, to do that well.
Yes.
So do we want to leave it at just the subcommittee and discussing composition? So it'd be a 2-hour meeting, just so for any other thoughts.
I think we can add powers and duties that may need to split off as a subcommittee, right?
I'm thinking some of the things on Marcia and the group's list will actually evolve into powers and duties. I really kind of like the idea of starting with a mission statement of a couple of lines and a few more lines, maybe a vision, and then a few lines about the mission statement, and then moving into the goals, which maybe I'm wrong, Brian, but I think that the goals would maybe sort of be the powers and.
Well, I guess I would say, I mean, there's many ways to look at these things, but I would tend to think the goals are more what this board or commission or whatever will be doing and accomplishing, so that the powers and duties are what gives it the ability to accomplish those goals.
Okay.
So goals being like sort of bigger picture, to provide trust and
Right.
transparency, to allow people to have external look at complaints or investigations, all those sorts of things. Those are kind of the goals. And then the powers and duties are the things that allow you to actually make that happen.
Okay. Well, that's helpful. So we could, or that first committee could look at their goals and maybe make some notes about associated powers that might go along with the goals. Hey, we've got time. I'm just talking. Somebody help me.
What do you think, subcommittee? Would you like to explore powers and duties and go back to meeting on the 1st and bring something into the next meeting?
I'm good with that.
It's fine by me too.
All right, back to the 1st of November. We'll meet and explore powers and duties.
Okay.
And I do think it's really helpful with your presentation earlier on the purpose. It kind of gave us the groundwork to what we're kind of aiming for. So I think it'd be helpful too to have that same thing with powers and duties. At least that helped me kind of organize my thoughts more.
With 2 or 3 days between the time we meet and the time we get together as a whole task force, I'm not sure that we're going to get as extensive a report pulled together, but we'll bring back whatever we've got for you.
Great, thank you.
So to the other 3 on our team, let's do a little looking at other models at powers and duties so that when we come together, we can brainstorm again and see what we come up with. Thank you all.
Okay.
And I just had a quick question for Stu. I don't know if there's an answer to this, but with the Town of Bennington survey, it did ask some questions that may impact our community. Do you know when you may have any data back from that?
The survey concludes November 5th. And probably, I think I think the goal is to take approximately a week to pull all of the information together, because the survey is online. It's in hard copy in various locations. As those hard copies come in, we're putting them into the online survey here with some of our staff. So probably a week to 2 weeks at the most. So whatever that takes us to, November 12th or perhaps November 19th, we might have some information for you. And you meet again on the 4th and then on the 18th. So certainly by the 18th, we should have some
Okay,
information.
great. Okay, so it is now time for public comment.
Okay, and I have to do my thing again. For those of you who wish to participate in the meeting, and we have 3 attendees currently in the queue, but they have not asked to be heard. You can join this meeting by Zoom using the notice found on the town's website. It is under the Select Boards tab. You can dial in to 646-558-8656 and enter the webinar ID 864-6641-5624, and then follow the prompts. If you wish to participate in this public comment period, you would have to be recognized by the chair. You can raise your hand by hitting *9. If the chair then recognizes you, you would unmute yourself by pressing *6. And this assumes you're on telephone calling in. And then please state your name and your place of residence before speaking. So there you have it. And now we wait to see. Well, it doesn't look like anybody is calling in at the present time. I leave it to the co-chairs as to whether to adjourn or not.
Before we adjourn, I'll give them another minute. Any other thoughts in the meantime?
Well, as long as you got a minute, I'd just like to say to Brian, thank you again for that great presentation you did to start us off. A lot of what helped us with our purpose discussions was having reviewed your slideshow. It really gave us a lot to chew on, and thank you.
You're very welcome. It's my pleasure.
So should we make a move to adjourn?
So
All
move.
in favor? everyone say aye? All in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm sorry for the notes. Who seconded Marsh's move to adjourn?
Margate did the motion. I believe Marsh seconded it. Is that correct?
Gotcha.
And did we get the vote? Everybody in favor?
Aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay, I think we're all set. We will see everybody in our next meeting, which is November 4th in person at the Bennington Firehouse, 3rd floor. That will be from 4:30 to 6:30 as well, too.
Right.
Look forward to seeing all of you there.
Very good.
Bye, everyone. Good night.
Bye.
Have a good night.
Good
Take
night,
care.
everyone.